This study is about different cases of social engineering attacks from rural India, and it finds patterns regarding the impact and nature of such attacks. The existing literature on Indian cybercrime focuses on the types of cybercrime and preventative measures rather than looking at the factors that actually enable such attacks and the gender specific aspects of it. Hence, this paper takes an intersectional feminist approach to explore how cybercrimes affect men and women differently in rural India and how actually these cybercrimes happen. And in doing so, it emphasizes how data is being leaked and accessed by different people. And this is where the paper also draws a distinction between social engineering attacks and cybercrime. A social engineering attack is defined as an attack that identifies people's weaknesses and susceptibility to manipulation and targets that to access sensitive information. Drawing this distinction helps in problem framing. It shifts the focus from our intuitive association of cybercrime with sophisticated technical mechanisms to rather simplistic forms of crime. This shows that the attackers do not use sophisticated hacking techniques to commit large-scale data breaches. Rather, they orchestrate attacks based on the limited and readily available data in this data-fied society. So, to study the social engineering attacks, the paper uses three main frameworks. There's the Mitkins social engineering attack cycle framework, which discusses the stages of the attack. So the first stage is research, where the attacker will gather information regarding the person's personal data, their digital literacy levels, and the scarcity that the community faces. And based on that, they're going to design the attack. And after this, they'll disseminate information in such a way that they can establish themselves as an authority figure and develop trust with the victim. And eventually, in the final stage, they exploit the trust either for psychological gain or financial gain. To understand the gendered nature of social engineering attacks, the paper also takes an intersectional feminist lens to understand the interacting variables of gender, geography, culture, and religion. The tripartite cybercrime framework helps the study distinguish between different types of cybercrime and make the categorizations of unique socioeconomic attacks, large-scale socioeconomic attacks, and the psychosocial economic attacks. Socioeconomic attacks are motivated by financial gain, whereas psychosocial attacks are motivated by some psychological gain. In unique socioeconomic attacks, we see that each attack has certain idiosyncrasies, which prevents it from being deployed to a large amount of people. And in large-scale socioeconomic attacks, for example, like OTP frauds, you have a certain set pipeline of what you do in order to victimize a large group of people. And in psychosocial attacks, you would usually see things like blackmailing, cyber stalking, cyberbullying, and cyber harassment, which usually are not motivated by financial gain. This is the methodology of the paper. The study was conducted over a period of 1 month in Saharanpur, UP, after identifying social engineering attacks as a pressing concern among people, where you could see how much money they were losing out on. The paper examines 27 cases from 11 gram panchayats, 15 cases related to women, 11 to men, and 2 to both. The nature of the interviews was unstructured and semi-structured. I also used focus groups to get more understanding of a specific kind of cybercrime if it was recurring in nature. And there were three kinds of people being interviewed. One, who were victims. Second, who were people who knew the victims and knew the case in detail. And third were people who registered complaints about cybercrime. And these were people who usually ran their own CSC centers. The paper found that men are predominantly targeted in high-value socioeconomic cybercrimes, whereas women are less frequently the victims of such crime. This could be because men have more access to cell phones and net banking facilities rather than women. Hence, it would be easier to target men. Men facing substantial financial fraud issues often reported these incidents, but they struggled to find resolution because the attacker could have closed their ID, the attacker would be untraceable, and I also found that there was a lot of misinformation regarding the reporting channels for cybercrime. women and men both preferred not to register a complaint when the cybercrime was of low value because they feared that the time and effort spent in registering the complaint was more than the money that they had lost. Women often refrained from reporting cybercrimes altogether because they feared verbal and physical abuse at home. In psychosocial attacks, we also found that attacks against women were motivated through sexual favors, whereas attack towards men were again motivated by financial gains. Through interviews with the CSC Center owners, I found that attackers acquired data through sources like government beneficiary lists, e-governance sites, web tracking, and also if someone had an access to an e-district ID, they could map they could also map the e-governance services a person had applied for. In this slide, the paper also discusses the Digital Personal Data Protection Act and understands why the bill might be falling short in protecting the rural community's interests. The main point of the paper was to understand and view people as data fight citizens and to understand how this data could be taken and used to exploit them. And one of the main things that the Digital Data Protection Bill should do is protect that data because social engineering attacks is a very real concern of this readily available data. Huh. And as technology rapidly advances, now we have generative AI coming in. So there's also a concern that these attacks are going to get much easier to operate. In this background, the paper discusses the major shortcomings of the Act. First, the Act is heavily relies on consent. And it also mentions that the consent form should be available in all the languages mentioned in the 8th schedule in the Constitution. However, we are ignoring the fact that forget whether people know how to read or not. Even people who know how to read, do they know how data is being stored and collected and how it can be used against them? Are we ready for an act that heavily emphasizes on consent? Moving on, we also have deceptive patterns, which is also a part of the consent debate. Now, when there are deceptive patterns, it's very easy for the designers to push you to the outcome that they want. They can easily maximize the amount of data collected from you by enabling consent through design. Like they can make the accept all cookies easier to click. They can make the consent form be on another page so that now it's harder for you to access it or access alternatives. And, and third, the act allows government to continue processing and storing data like they were. However, we can still see that in the rural communities, there's so many levels of data collection happening from the Gram Panchayat level to the block level. And all this data is being stored and it's also being leaked to third parties. Hence, we need more training and we need more understanding of how we can protect how we can protect this data from reaching into third. Hence, we need more regulatory mechanisms on. Hence, we need more regulatory mechanisms on how we can protect that data and how we can create a consciousness about data in the rural populace. Yeah, these were the few limitations of the paper. The intersectional feminist lens fails to take into account trans women and show any visible disparities in class identities because of the limited sample size. Given the limited time of the study, it also fails to take into account different patterns that might emerge in different villages given the specific scarcity that it faces. For example, if one Gram Panchayat is really struggling with a specific e-governance issue like colony, then social engineering attacks steering towards colony and that specific e-governance benefit could be the most prevalent social engineering attack there. Yeah, so I feel like looking into those patterns is something that will help the study become much richer. Yeah, thank you, and please don't share your vote with me.